Welcome, my erudite friends, to another edition of MonteCristo's Power Rankings, the Thinking Fans Power Rankings. Today we are going to discuss global rankings for the top 10 teams in the world, covering all of the major regions, LCK, LPL, LEC, and LCS. But just kidding, none of the Western teams are on this list. Unfortunately, the Western teams right now, LEC, we've seen a lot of losses from the top teams or other general weakness in terms of gameplay, particularly with Vitality losing their match this past week against Koi, and G2 looking vulnerable in the later stages of the first round robin. So while G2 may be threatening by the time we get to another power rankings in 2 weeks' time, right now they will have to take a backseat to the Asian teams. Many of you may be wondering about FlyQuest. Well, FlyQuest hasn't had the cleanest games in a weak region, and I would say their undefeated record does put them on the cusp, but as of the time of this recording, they are still only 6-0. If we start to see 8-0, 10-0, that's when I think we'll start seeing them creep up into the 10th, 9th place positions. But LCK and LPL, as I'm sure you well-educated fans know, are very, very powerful right now and contain many rosters with concentrations of superstar players. So first off, we are going to start with number 10, going in reverse order, of course, as is the Power Rankings custom. And at number 10, we do have EDG. Now, EDG is certainly a team like IG that has been boosted by playing a variety of weak teams, and while they are currently on top of the standings, they do have a very tough week this week against both top Esports and JDG. Now, they have an opportunity to really jump up the ranks if they do well against those teams, but right now they don't really have any meaningful wins, and they have lost to IG, another team that is probably fraudulent when it comes to the top of the LPL table. EDG is also a team that downgraded, I would say, at both the mid and AD carry positions with the departure of Scout and Viper. So I think they're kind of lucky to be in the top 10 at all, frankly. And that's because Fofo and Liiv have been better than expected. They've been better than expected on this roster. But as we've talked about, it's up to them this week to forge their own destiny against two of the super teams within the LPL. At number 9, we have Liiv SANDBOX, arguably the most fraudulent Korean team that we've had. They are 6-2, but they have yet to play T1, which will be coming up later this week. And they've been playing close series with bottom teams. So they've beaten the teams we would have expected. I think this team will probably be somewhat of a gatekeeper for the playoffs, and maybe ending the next round robin 5-4 or 4-5. They almost certainly, unless T1 chokes, will finish this one 6-3. However, their roster on paper looks pretty strong. Closer and KIA remaining on this roster after last season. Both of them were really solid players and, you know, among the top 5 at their positions within the LCK. They brought in Envy, who struggled early at AD carry and still sometimes plays a little bit too aggressively. He likes to make the big plays. Sometimes that's very flashy and effective. Sometimes it's kind of int, if we're being honest. But he has been improving steadily. Willer is probably one of the biggest surprises in the LCK this season. He's been one of the better junglers within the region. And Birdall, he's a solid top laner. So this team, I think, you know, maybe they might be able to get up there into the top 5, but there's a lot of stiff competition with better rosters in Korea, but they still look like a fundamentally solid team. At number 8, we do have IG. Like EDG, they don't really have a lot of legit wins. They've lost to top as of this morning when we're recording these power rankings. They also lost to Thunder Talk, and their schedule has been relatively easy outside of that. There's been a lot of hype around their top laner, You Should Know Me, and he has been a very flashy, very exciting, very aggressive carry top laner. So they do have a lane to play through, and Dove, switching back from top lane to mid lane, has been better than expected as well. Bot lane, a little bit questionable, I think, on IG, and there will be a ceiling to how high this team can go. Regardless, they have a really strong start and a good record right now, but we expect them to slowly make their way to maybe the top of the mid-table. And that is also predicated on the fact that they can continue to play through top lane and that a top carry meta will be persistent throughout the entirety of the spring split. At number 7, we have Dplus. Now, a couple weeks ago, Dplus might have been in the top 4, but ever since that point in time, they played arguably the best overall League of Legends series so far this year. When they played against T1, it was extremely high level. Both teams obviously prepared very well. It was an absolute banger of a series. If you haven't seen it yet, worth going back and checking that one out. However, Dplus has continued to be plagued by macro mistakes since that point in time. Their early parts of the split were beating up on the bottom table of the LCK, which consists of a lot of teams that are dominated by rookie players, and you consider the veterans that are on Dplus this season. And it begins to be understandable why they would simply outclass those players at this point in their careers. Now, Kana, I think, has been struggling to integrate into this roster. Some of his TP play has been somewhat questionable. Showmaker has been underperforming relative to his very strong normal level that we expect from him as a world championship level mid laner. And unfortunately, the addition of Deft and Kana has not really fixed some of their awareness issues that they had last year as well when it comes to when they can and can't make plays on the map and how far they can push their advantages. Canyon has been overall spectacular, arguably the best jungler in the entire world, and Deft has also been very good, but it's not about really the individual play, it's about their cohesion that they really are going to have to find if they want to challenge some of the best teams in the LCK. At number 6, we have KT. KT, who would have thought? Coming off a very strong week, they really had tough opponents this week in both Dplus and GenG. And you may be asking yourself, well, if they beat GenG, why aren't they up even higher? Well, there were some asterisks about those wins versus GenG. First off, GenG dominated the first game, came back with, I think, a bit of a troll draft. GenG picked Yuumi on the 13.1B patch, which was a nerfed Yuumi. And even though the laning phase of that Yuumi was not one of the bigger factors in this game, they also gave a Kassadin over to BDD, and you can't disrespect KT like that and expect to win. Like, KT is a pretty good team, and they were able to win that game relatively easily, and then a close game that arguably GenG should have won again in game number 3, but KT managed to pull out in the end. And we saw a similar arc with Dplus, where Dplus tried to play a Ziggs Pyke bot lane, which is really strange for Dplus in game number 2 of that series, which they also lost. Then KT was able to reverse sweep there as well. So while they were able to pull out these wins, and they are valid because it's not KT's fault that their opponents were making these very uncharacteristically bad drafts into them in game number 2s, and then they were able to bounce back and win the 3rd game of those series as well. I'm not sure that they are really as good as this week would have had you believe. There are some really strong points to this roster, though. First off, both BDD and Keen had poor years last year, and it seemed to have bounced back very well. Cuz seems to be getting better week over week. Aiming was incredible last year, as those of you who watch the LCK know, and even though he started this year kind of uncharacteristically bad, he seems to have returned to form at this point in time. And they have Lehens, who has always been a solid, especially enchanter support player. So KT, this roster on paper looks good. It looks good in the server as well. I don't think they have the same skill ceiling as a team like Dplus, but they should be up there in the top 5 for sure and have a very high floor, it seems right now. And certainly teams can't screw around with them and try and make weird drafts and expect to guaranteed win that 3rd game of the series, as they've proved amply in the past week. Now, KT, do they also play to the level of their opponents? Yes, they do. They've also lost to bad teams, which is why they're a little bit further down in the standings. And speaking of losing to bad teams, our number 5 team is Weibo over in the LPL. This team is very confusing. They definitely, like KT, play to the level of their opponent. They have beaten both of the top teams, arguably in the LPL, in JDG and Top, but they've also lost to BLG and ThunderTalk. Where does this put them? Right in the middle of the top 10, of course. You can't take those L's and look kind of embarrassing while doing so, even if you are able to take down some of the titans within your league. This is a team where the roster should be definitely top 3 alongside JDG and Top, and we've seen that ceiling when they've played against those teams. Light as an AD carry, I think, is pretty underrated right now. He's a more safe, conservative AD carry, but he does what this team needs him to do, which is be low risk, have a high floor, and be a stable player. Crisp is probably one of the best support players in the world right now, has looked absolutely amazing in terms of his playmaking on Enchanter supports. And Xiaohu, King of Spring, and Karsa, both looking pretty good right now on the whole, although Karsa has been somewhat hit or miss. The real question about this team is the Shy, because the Shy has kind of that Nuggery quality where he will draw a lot of attention into top side and die frequently in lane, but then be incredibly relevant in certain team fights, especially on tank champions, like we saw this past week when they beat JDG while he played Sion in their 2 wins. He kind of ran it down in lane, but then was absolutely crucial to those team fights. Now, other games, he runs it down and they just lose. So the Shy, very, very confusing player at this point in time, as he has been his entire career. I think that might limit this team's ability to win a prolonged best of 5 because his consistency may not be there, and he is exploitable in many ways, I feel, if he is targeted out in that top lane, or just frankly has a bad game, he can completely lose you the game. So this team, I also question whether they would have beaten JDG in an important series because they played Ruler on arguably his worst day so far this year. Ruler looked more like Jackie Love in terms of his uncharacteristic and unbridled aggression. I don't think we're going to see that version of Ruler again unless he's been totally infected by the LPL. So I don't read too much into that win from Weibo. Number 4, we have GenG. I am really surprised that I have GenG up this high at this point in the season. We wouldn't have anticipated that they would be the second best team in the LCK after replacing one of the greatest players in the world in Ruler with a rookie in Pays and Lehens with Delight. But here we are. And I guess in retrospect, they have been able to maintain their style, and perhaps we should have anticipated this, because as long as Peanut is in the game running their macro and doing lane assignments for the players, they're able to keep up with their very macro-heavy vision control, take all the camps on the map play style that really defined them last year. And I think people really don't understand how GenG plays, because a lot of the action that defines GenG happens off the camera, and it doesn't happen with fights. It happens with wave manipulation. It happens with catching every single minion. It happens with jungle invades. Right now, they take over 56% of total jungle creeps in the game. That's 4% higher than the next team in the LCK, which is T1. They're incredibly efficient with vision. They actually buy the fewest number of pink wards per minute, but they clear the most wards per minute of any team in the LCK. So they're getting really, really good value for the control wards that they do buy. And they're that, boa constrictor team that just chokes you out slowly on the map, gets vision, takes uncontested objectives, has a gold lead because they simply farm more minions and jungle camps than you do, and then they take it into a scenario where they have very skilled players like Chovy and now Pays that can really dominate team fights. And Pays is certainly more aggressive in team fighting than Ruler, which is really fun to watch. Pays has had excellent laning phases, excellent team fights. He has had brain farts as a rookie where he dies in stupid places on the map, But that has actually been improving quite a bit, and he's not making the same mistakes being dove under turrets, especially, that he was making in the first few games of the season. I do wonder why they picked a very nerfed Yuumi and gave Cass to BDD in Game 2 of that series. Seems rather cocky. If this is a playoff game, I don't think that happens. This team should be a title contender. They are improving week over week. At number 3, we have Top Esports. Top has not lost a series since they lost to Weibo in their very first match of the season. Remember, they had a new roster. This team has extremely high variance. On a good day, Top Esports can probably be the best team in the world. On a bad day, they can be absolute garbage, which is much different than most of the other teams that we have in the top 4 here that have a pretty high floor and a relative level of stability. This high variance comes, of course, from Jackie Love, who, as we've known, can be incredibly dominant, can also lose you the game. It also comes from Tian, who has looked good so far, but once Tian gets to international competition, he hasn't held up to his status as an LPL MVP. We certainly saw that at Worlds, where he won the Dade Award this last year after being LPL MVP. He really had a terrible Worlds performance. The biggest question mark for Top is their top lane, ironically, which is Qingtian right now. Last year they ran Wayward. Wayward is still on the roster, but apparently Wayward has been performing very poorly, we must assume, in scrims in order not to get this starting position. It's a shame because Wayward was pretty amazing as a rookie player. He was medium to bad at Worlds, and then we just haven't seen him since. And Qingtian has had really high highs. I mean, I'm sure many of you have seen the 3v1 Darius play that Qingtian had. Absolutely amazing. When he's on, but again, a high variance player. Rookie is probably the most stable part of this team. He's still getting up to speed after a break, but this is a star-studded roster. Has been really fun to watch. And next week, I believe, will be the top JDG match that we've all been looking forward to. At number 2, we've got JDG. JDG should have been number 1 on this list, but they just lost to Weibo. They have looked crazy good right at the start of the season, and you would not have expected that because rookie's moving into a new team. You would expect him to perhaps struggle a little bit with the language difference. Apparently, we have seen, they have been translating for him a bit in comms so far. But the fact that these guys had instant synergy, and JDG upgraded both mid and AD carry, which were probably their 2 worst positions in the last season when they were still an extremely good team, is terrifying. Should be terrifying to many teams around the world. Ruler has been so dominant outside of their game to Weibo. He has been crushing lanes that he should be losing. He has been taking over the game before 20 minutes. It has been JDG wrecking everybody and looking squeaky clean while doing it. Again, it was just this last loss to Weibo, a bad day for Ruler that just tipped them a little bit off of the very top slot here. I still think JDG is the favorite for the World Championship this year. This team's floor is incredibly high with the roster that they have developed. It seems to be an extremely well-constructed roster as well. 369 has been very good in the top lane. Even when he's been playing more of a weak side style or going back to his signature Gragas, he's getting solo kills. This roster is just loaded with talent, and I think anything short of international titles and LPL titles would be a massive disappointment for this team. And at number 1, we have T1. T1 arrives in spring 2023 with so many advantages. They didn't change their roster, so they are able to maintain the synergy that they had last season. A synergy, by the way, that won them 1 LCK title, got them to the finals of another, got them to the finals of MSI, and got them to the finals of the World Championship. Yeah, they only won 1 of those 4 final matches, but their consistency was just extraordinary last year, and we see that again. Another thing that's pushing them up the rankings is, yes, they lost to Hanwha Life, it has been their only loss so far, and we did see them drafting things that they probably wouldn't have picked against other teams. I think they took their foot off the gas there. They tried to do some experimentation against a weaker team. They got caught off guard by a Hanwha Life that has been improving over time and started their turnaround basically at that juncture, and Hanwha has been getting better as well. Faker is also having a really good season right now. This is one of Faker's best seasons probably in several years, and it's not that he's changed his style from what he was playing last year, which was a very low economy but very effective mid laner. It's just that he's somehow even better at it right now. Statistically, Faker is taking the lowest CS percentage after 15 minutes of any mid laner in the LCK, and he has the second highest damage per minute overall. So he is really doing an excellent job of maximizing his value while giving the majority of the gold over to his teammates. We also have KIA, who probably is the leading candidate for MVP in the LCK right now, might be the single best player in the world. He has been innovating the AD carry meta, as many of you know, especially by using his insane mechanics to play AD carries at the support position. It's been Caitlyn, it's been Kalista, it's been Ashe, it goes on and on and on. Showing the power of Hail of Blades, Serrated Dirk, and Umbral Glaive. This meta has now reverberated worldwide, and he is the very best at it. It makes drafting versus T1, particularly when T1 is on the red side and has R5 support pick, a terrible nightmare for teams to deal with. And they have also maintained their style. And their style really was about creating long-range pick compositions. They are probably the best team in the world at engaging on you from a distance or just killing you in ways that you don't think you can die. A lot of this comes from long-range lockdown. We saw this recently when they ran a Caitlyn, Varus, and Nidalee combination, where the Chain of Corruption was just leading immediately into Nidalee spears, Caitlyn Qs, Varus Qs, Caitlyn ults. I mean, everything, just annihilating people from 100 to 0. We've seen it when they run Lissandra comps this season. It has been a very typical showing from T1, and they are still the best pick comp team in the world. Now, the question will be, can T1 maintain this? Because even though Zeus has been remarkable domestically, he didn't really show up for the World Finals, which was disappointing, and he needs to live up to his superstar status and make sure that he can actually take home an international title this year. It's hard to nitpick T1 because of their consistency in reaching these final matches, but they haven't seemed to be able to grasp the necessary clutch factor in order to make that happen. Now, worth noting, T1 did this with a lot of young players last year. They have basically all of the high-stress situations under their belt right now. This year is the one where there really aren't any excuses anymore. They're not going to be as young. They've been through the ringer. They've been through the tough times, and they've been on the biggest stages in the world, so now it is time to deliver. And they may have a hard time versus a team like JDG, but they should still be an early World's favorite, or at least an MSI favorite, you'd have to believe. Thank you very much for joining me for this edition of MonteCristo's Power Rankings. Be sure to subscribe to us here at Last Free Nation. See you in a couple weeks.